Imagine opening your eyes with no alarm, no phone vibrating beside your bed, no clock glowing in the dark, no list of tasks already waiting to claim your mind before your body has even moved. There's no schedule to check, no traffic to beat, no message demanding an answer. Instead, you wake because the world itself is changing. The darkness behind your eyelids has softened into gray. Cold air brushes your skin. Somewhere close by, a log shifts in the fire and sends up a brief shower of sparks. You hear breathing all around you, slow and deep, then a cough, then the quiet murmur of two voices speaking before sunrise. You are not alone. You have never truly been alone. Around you, bodies lie beneath hides and woven coverings curled close together for warmth. Not because this is sentimental, but because heat matters. Through most of human existence, warmth was not a convenience. It was a shared resource. During the night, your people slept close because every bit of body heat helped everyone else survive until dawn. The shelter is stone, maybe a cave mouth, maybe a deep overhang in a cliff, maybe a structure built from wood, hide, bone, and branches depending on where you live. 40,000 years ago, humans lived across many landscapes, from cold grasslands to forests to river valleys to coastal regions. There was no single prehistoric lifestyle. But everywhere, morning began not with machinery, but with light. The fire never fully died. That matters more than a modern person might first realize. Fire was comfort, protection, cooking, warmth, light, and security. Fire turned dangerous darkness into usable time. Fire changed roots into food, hardened wood into stronger tools, drove away predators, dried wet clothing, soothed fear, and gathered people into a circle where stories could live. Letting it go out completely was costly. Restarting it could take time, energy, and luck. So through the night, someone fed it. Someone always watched. The person awake now kneels beside the embers and places dry fuel carefully, not wastefully. A breath, a glow. Then flame returns, small at first, then growing stronger. Orange light moves across the stone walls. Shadows shift over sleeping faces. More people begin to stir. A child sits up immediately. That has not changed much in 40,000 years. Children wake ready for motion. A little hand reaches toward the warmth. Someone's mother catches the wrist before it gets too close to the flame. The child wriggles free and laughs. Another child hears it and joins in. Within moments, the stillness of night is breaking apart into the sound of life. Adults rise more slowly. There is stiffness in shoulders and hips from sleeping on the ground. There are old injuries that complain in the cold. There are tired muscles from yesterday's walk, yesterday's gathering, yesterday's carrying, yesterday's work. But there is no panic in waking. No one bolts upright in fear of being late. No one checks numbers on a screen. No one starts the day already behind. People stretch. They rub sleep from their eyes. They rearrange bedding. They add fuel to the fire. They step outside one by one into the pale dawn to relieve themselves, to breathe the morning air, to look at the sky. And the sky is information. To your people, weather is not background scenery. It is a force that shapes every decision. Clouds matter. Wind matters. Moisture matters. The smell of the air matters. A person with years of experience can read signs that others miss entirely. A shift in birdsong. The direction smoke drifts. The behavior of insects. The feel of humidity on skin. These are clues, and clues can mean food, rain, danger, movement, opportunity. One of the elders studies the horizon. Perhaps it will be clear weather. Good for travel. Good for hunting. Good for drying meat or plant fibers. Or perhaps rain is building beyond the hills. Then plans change. Then resources must be protected. Then movement may wait. This is one of the great truths of prehistoric life. Flexibility was intelligence. Modern people often imagine intelligence only as writing equations, building machines, memorizing facts. But for most of human history, intelligence meant adapting quickly to a changing world. It meant remembering where water remained during drought. It meant knowing which routes were safe after frost and which became dangerous. It meant understanding animal behavior, reading tracks, predicting weather, settling disputes, caring for children, repairing tools, and cooperating with others, even when everyone was tired. The morning circle forms naturally. No bell calls anyone. No authority commands attendance. Yet people gather because gathering is useful. Around the fire, warmth draws them close. Here food can be shared. Here plans can be discussed. Here the group becomes fully awake together. You hear voices growing stronger now. Some words are practical. Someone saw tracks yesterday near the river. Someone else noticed berries ripening farther south. Another mentions a damaged carrying basket that needs repair. A young person describes a strange dream, and several people listen seriously. That may surprise you, but dreams likely mattered. Many traditional societies across the world treat dreams not as meaningless static, but as experiences worth discussing. We cannot know exactly how every Paleolithic group interpreted dreams, but we do know symbolic thought was already deeply human. These were people who created art, buried their dead, decorated objects, and passed down traditions. They were not empty-minded creatures stumbling through instinct. They were reflective beings living inside culture. The children are playing already. They chase each other near the edge of camp, weaving around stones and brush. They wrestle, shout, run, fall, rise again. It looks like simple fun, and it is. But it is also training. Through play they build balance, speed, endurance, social awareness, negotiation, risk judgment, and confidence. No formal lesson is needed. Human childhood evolved to learn through play long before schools existed. Nearby, a teenager sits with an older adult and examines a spear shaft. The point is still attached, but the binding has loosened slightly. They heat resin near the fire, soften it, tighten the fit, wrap fresh sinew. Hands demonstrate what words alone cannot teach. This is how knowledge moves through generations. Watching, copying, correcting, repeating. No textbooks, no manuals, yet expertise everywhere. That is another misunderstanding modern people often carry. We assume ancient people were ignorant because they lacked modern technology. But lacking machines is not the same as lacking knowledge. A person in this camp may know hundreds of plants by season and use. Another may identify animals from a single print in mud. Another may shape stones so precisely that each strike removes exactly the flake intended. Another may calm conflict before it becomes violence. Another may remember stories stretching back generations that encode geography, danger, kinship, and law. Knowledge existed. It simply lived in memory, skill, and community rather than on paper. The smell of food begins to rise. There is no breakfast in a modern sense. No universal morning meal served at a fixed hour. Humans for most of history ate when food was available, when hunger returned, when preparation was possible. But now people are hungry, and something will be eaten. A strip of leftover meat from a previous kill is passed around. Tough, smoky, rich. It takes effort to chew. Strong jaws were common because food often demanded work before swallowing. Beside are nuts collected days earlier. Someone cracks shells with practiced pressure using a stone. Children try and fail, then try again. Near the edge of the coals, roots have been resting in residual heat since the night before. This is quiet technology. No mataalpot, no stove, no recipe card, yet sophisticated understanding. Certain roots become digestible only after heating. Fibers soften, starches transform, toxins reduce. Over immense spans of time, humans learned these transformations not through laboratories, but through observation, experimentation, memory, and survival. A woman peels one open and steam rises into the cold air. She bites first, nods, then hands pieces to others. It is not luxury food, but it is nourishing, safe, and welcome. Hunger makes honest judges. People do not line up with plates. They eat while talking, while tending children, while fixing tools, while feeding the fire. A toddler wanders from one adult to another collecting bites from every side. Nobody seems offended. Children belong not only to parents, but but to the group. This pattern appears again and again in hunter-gatherer studies from recent centuries. Childcare is often shared. Food is often shared. Skills are shared. Responsibility is distributed. Human beings evolved in webs of interdependence, and many traces of that still remain in us even now. Think about how unnatural total isolation can feel. Think about how deeply rejection hurts. Think about why loneliness can become physical pain. These emotions did not appear by accident. For ancestral humans, separation from the group could be dangerous. Belonging mattered. The sun climbs higher. Mist lifts from the ground. Cold retreats from the shelter entrance. Shadows shorten. The time for stillness is ending. Soon smaller groups will leave camp for different tasks. But even this idea of tasks needs care. Modern work is often divided sharply from life. There is job time and free time, labor and leisure, clocked effort and private recovery. In the Paleolithic world, those lines blur. Repairing a basket may happen during conversation. Teaching a child may happen while gathering roots. Storytelling may happen while preparing hides. Music may happen after carrying wood. Work and life are woven together. One person checks a bundle of stone flakes. These sharp edges are precious. A good flake can cut meat, scrape hide, shape wood, carve bone, trim cordage. Stone technology was not primitive in the sense of careless or random. It was highly skilled craftsmanship. At some archaeological sites, the precision of blade production reveals planning, standardization, and expertise that took years to master. Another person sorts plant fibers for cordage. String sounds humble until you imagine life without it. No nets, no secure bindings, no slings, no many-part tools, no easy carrying systems, no woven containers. Rope and cord transformed what humans could build and transport. Yet because plant fibers decay, much of this labor vanishes from the archaeological record. We remember stone because stone survives. Entire worlds of perishable skill are mostly invisible. Someone else inspects hides drying from a previous hunt. If treated well, hide becomes clothing, wrapping, bedding, shelter material, baby carriers, water containers, straps, and more. Softening a hide can require scraping, stretching, smoking, rubbing fats, repeated handling. Time-consuming work? Yes, but valuable work. And through all of this, there is conversation. Laughter, too. It is important to say this clearly. Ancient life was not joyless. Hardship existed, certainly. Injury, hunger, grief, cold, uncertainty, disease. But hardship does not erase laughter. In many difficult societies, humor becomes even more important. People tease, mimic, exaggerate, tell stories, flirt, boast, complain, and joke because they are human. One older man imitates the clumsy way a young hunter slipped in mud last week. The camp laughs, including the embarrassed hunter. Someone adds details that clearly did not happen. The story grows more ridiculous with each retelling. Memory becomes entertainment. The child who woke first now returns carrying a stick twice their size, as if it were a grand trophy. Adults admire it with exaggerated seriousness. The child beams. The fire snaps. Smoke rises through cool air. The day is now fully alive. Soon some will go gather food. Some may track game. Some remain with infants or elders. Some repair tools. Some process materials. Some teach. Some simply accompany others and learn by being present. There is no office to arrive at, yet there is purpose everywhere. And perhaps that is one of the uncomfortable questions ancient mornings raise for us now. We often speak as though modern life finally gave humans meaning through productivity. Yet here, tens of thousands of years ago, meaning already existed. It existed in contribution, skill, belonging, attention, memory, and mutual dependence. Not easy lives, not perfect lives, but full ones. You finish the last bite in your hand and stand. The ground is warming beneath the sun. Voices drift across camp. Baskets are being lifted. Spears are being checked. A baby begins to cry and is comforted instantly. Someone calls for another to come see fresh tracks beyond the stones. A pair of children run past in a burst of dust and laughter. Another ordinary day of human history has begun, and now the real work of survival is about to start. You step away from the warmth of the fire and into the open morning, and almost immediately the world feels larger. Camp had been its own small universe of smoke, voices, children, tools, and familiar faces. Beyond it lies the true setting of your life, the landscape itself, not scenery, not wilderness in the modern sense. Home, storehouse, map, memory, teacher, and test. Several people are leaving together. Not a marching line, not a military unit, not a dramatic expedition with music swelling in the background. Just people moving with purpose. A few carry woven baskets slung by straps across shoulders or foreheads. One has a digging stick hardened in fire and polished by years of use. Another carries a hide bag for smaller finds. A child trots beside them, trying to match adult strides. A baby rides against someone's back, wrapped in softened skin and held close by a broad strap across the chest. This is the work that fed people most reliably. It rarely receives glory in modern retellings because it lacks the spectacle of charging animals and flying spears. There is no single triumphant moment, no beast collapsing in a cloud of dust, no heroic soundtrack. But if you measured survival honestly, this steady morning departure mattered more than most hunts ever would. The group moves at a sustainable pace. No one rushes. They may walk many miles before returning, and energy is precious. Every unnecessary burst of effort costs calories that must later be replaced. Human bodies are built for endurance, not waste. Step after step, breath after breath, the rhythm settles in. The terrain changes quickly. Perhaps you cross open grassland where dew still clings to low plants and darkens your feet. Perhaps scrub brush catches at your legs. Perhaps the path rises into stony ground where each step must be chosen carefully. Maybe there is no path at all in the modern sense, yet everyone knows where to go. That knowledge lives in memory. A bend in a stream means cattails farther ahead. A certain line of trees marks ground where tubers grow after late rains. The south-facing slope ripens berries earlier than the shaded side. Fallen logs near damp soil may hide edible fungi in the right season. The old oak grove yields nuts, but only after wind from the west. None of this is written anywhere. None of it needs to be. A modern person dropped here might see only random nature. Your people see signals everywhere. The oldest woman in the group slows and turns her head slightly. She has noticed something others nearly missed. Birds lifting suddenly from a patch of brush. Maybe a fox passed through moments ago. Maybe nothing important. Still, the movement is registered, stored, connected to other signs. Another person kneels beside the ground. At first you see dirt. Then you see disturbed dirt. Then, once it is pointed out, you notice where small hooves cut lightly across damp soil. Deer, and not long ago. The group is not hunting now, but information is never wasted. If hunters leave later, this may matter. They continue on. The child beside you asks questions constantly. Why are those leaves curled? Why do these stones glitter? Why can birds eat berries that make people sick? Adults answer when useful, laugh when the questions become endless, and sometimes answer with stories instead of direct explanation. That is not avoidance. It is education. Stories carry memory better than lists. A warning attached to a tale of someone who ignored it becomes unforgettable. Never eat the red berries is easy to forget. Your mother's brother ate the bright red berries after the first frost, spent 2 days bent in pain, and missed the salmon run stays in the mind. You reach a patch of low growth that looks unremarkable. The elder smiles. She pushes the digging stick into the soil, twists, pries upward, and breaks the ground open. Beneath the surface lies a thick root, pale and heavy with starch. Then another. Then another. What looked like nothing becomes food. This is one of the great hidden realities of ancient life. Much of value is underground, seasonal, subtle, or disguised. You had to know where to look. The roots are not all the same. Some can be roasted immediately. Some must be soaked. Some become edible only after long heating. Some are safe in one season and bitter in another. Some resemble dangerous species so closely that only leaf shape or smell reveals the difference. Imagine carrying that much information in your head. Modern people store passwords, appointments, addresses, and login codes. Your ancestors stored ecosystems. The baskets begin to fill. Roots thud softly into woven containers. Loose soil is shaken off to save weight. The child is allowed to carry the smallest ones and feels proud of contributing. Pride matters too. Children who feel useful keep learning to become useful adults. The group moves again, now toward wetter ground. You smell water before you see it. Mud darkens the earth. Reeds rise ahead in dense stands. Insects hum above the surface. A shallow marsh spreads between grasses and low trees. Here, another set of resources waits. Cattail roots, tender shoots, bird eggs if luck favors you, fibers for weaving, maybe fish trapped in pools if the water is falling. A place like this is not one thing. It is many things layered together. Can't go to work. Mud sucks at ankles. Digging is slower here. Roots resist more stubbornly. A woman laughs as the child nearly loses a sandal like foot wrap in the muck. The baby wakes and begins to fuss, then settles once shifted to the other hip. Work continues through interruption. That may be one of the most foreign aspects of this world to many modern people. There is no expectation of uninterrupted efficiency. Life happens inside labor. Children need feeding. Someone pauses to adjust a strap. Someone points out an interesting feather. Someone stops to urinate. Someone shares a joke. Then hands return to gathering. Nothing has been ruined. The task simply continues. By midday, the sun is higher and warmth presses harder on your shoulders. People rest and shade for a while. Not laziness. Strategy. Human beings pace themselves naturally when not trapped by clocks. They sit, drink if water is available, chew nuts, pass around dried berries, and inspect what has already been collected. One person pulls fibers from a plant stem and begins twisting them absent-mindedly into cord. Even rest becomes productive without feeling oppressive. Hands dislike idleness when useful work is familiar. The child asks for a story. An older man tells one about a season of scarce rain many years ago, when the band survived because a grandmother remembered hidden water in stone hollows far to the east. As he speaks, the lesson is buried inside the tale. Remember old people, remember places, remember that memory itself can save lives. This matters because elders in many foraging societies were not burdens. They were libraries. A slower body can still hold priceless knowledge. Where game migrates after wildfire. Which bark reduces fever. Which neighboring groups are friendly. How to settle a quarrel before it fractures cooperation. The archaeological record even shows individuals who lived with serious injuries or disabilities long enough to heal or survive for years, evidence that others cared for them. Compassion is ancient. After resting, the group rises again. Now they search for nuts. A grove stands ahead where trees have fruited well in recent years. But abundance is never guaranteed. Frost, drought, insects, storms, and competition from animals all matter. You arrive and immediately scan the ground. Shells. Good sign. Where shells lie broken, harvesting has begun by squirrels, birds, other humans, or all three. Still, many remain overhead. People spread out beneath branches. Some shake trunks. Some collect fallen nuts. Some use sticks to bring down reachable clusters. Children race to gather the easiest finds before anyone else can claim them. Laughter breaks out when one nut strikes a man squarely on the head. He pretends to collapse dramatically. The children scream with delight. Again, joy exists here. Do not let the roughness of life erase that truth. The nuts are valuable. Dense calories, fat, protein, storage potential. Foods like these helped humans endure lean seasons. Some can be eaten now, others dried or cached. Knowledge of preservation could mean the difference between surviving winter and not reaching spring. You notice that nobody strips the place bare. Some nuts are missed, some left, some unreachable, some intentionally ignored. This is not modern environmental ideology. It is practical continuity. If you destroy a resource today, you injure tomorrow. People who stayed in landscapes for generations learned this deeply. Overharvest too aggressively, and next season punishes you. The baskets are heavy now. Shoulders ache. Straps bite into skin. The child who wanted to carry more now wants to carry less. Adults smile without sympathy and redistribute the load. Lessons also come through fatigue. The walk back begins. Returning is quieter. Energy is lower. Feet drag more often. Yet there is satisfaction in weight. Heavy baskets mean security. Heavy baskets mean tonight's fire circle will eat. Along the way, someone spots tracks again. Not deer this time. Human. Everyone slows. The prints are older, perhaps yesterday, perhaps more. Another band passed through. You study direction, number, stride. Were they moving fast? Carrying loads? Traveling with children? No one can know everything, but much can be guessed. Other humans could mean trade, friendship, marriage ties, shared news, ritual gatherings. They could also mean tension. Prehistoric life was social, but not automatically peaceful. Groups sometimes competed over territory, resources, or old grievances. You would be wrong to imagine endless warfare too. Across many times and places, humans did what humans still do. Cooperate sometimes, distrust sometimes, exchange sometimes, avoid sometimes. The tracks continue west. Your group continues home. As camp nears, smoke becomes visible between trees or rising beyond stone. Voices drift on the air. Dogs do not yet exist in many regions at this date, though in some places early relationships with wolves may already be beginning. Mostly, it is human sound that welcomes you back. Children from camp run out first. They always seem to know when people return. They grab at baskets, search for treats, ask what was found, talk over one another. A root is handed to one, a cluster of berries to another. Immediate celebration. No formal applause follows. No ceremony announces success. Yet everyone notices what came back. Food that did not depend on luck. Food gathered through skill, patience, memory, endurance, and shared labor. Reliable food. The kind that keeps hunger away when hunters fail, weather turns, or animals move elsewhere. The baskets are emptied near the fire. Roots to one side, nuts to another. Seeds separated from debris. Fibers hung to dry. Medicinal bark kept apart. Someone begins sorting damaged pieces for immediate use and saving the best for later. Work transforms into the next kind of work. Roots will need roasting. Nuts cracking. Seeds grinding. Fibers weaving. Children feeding. Stories telling. Tools repairing. Nothing in this world arrives finished. Human hands complete almost everything. And that may be the deepest contrast with modern life. Today, many people interact mostly with finished objects. Food appears packaged. Tools appear manufactured. Heat appears at a switch. Water appears at a tap. We are surrounded by invisible systems run by strangers far away. But here, every necessity is visible. You know where food came from because you walked there. You know what effort it cost because your shoulders still ache. You know who helped because they stand beside you. You know what tomorrow requires because nature will ask again. As the afternoon light begins to soften, those who stayed behind ask what you saw. Were berries ripe near the southern ridge? Did the marsh still hold water? Any sign of strangers? Any fresh game tracks? Knowledge gathered on the land is shared like food. Information can feed future days. Someone laughs at the story of the nut falling on the hunter's head. The man objects loudly. Nobody believes his version. The children act it out with exaggerated drama. Nearby, an elder inspects the roots and nods approval. A good haul. No one says you are a hero. No one needs to. Because in the real history of our species, survival was built less often by spectacular victories than by ordinary competence repeated day after day. And while the gathered food is sorted and the fire grows stronger for evening, another group in the distance may already be returning too, lighter in basket, carrying spears instead. The hunters are coming back, and their day was far less certain. Long before you see them, you sense a change in camp. People glance toward the open land more often. Children drift to the edge of a settlement and stare into the distance. Someone standing near the fire shades their eyes and studies movement beyond the ridge. The return of hunters always carries tension because their absence means uncertainty. They may come back with food. They may come back empty-handed. They may come back injured. Sometimes they do not come back when expected at all. Then shapes appear. At first, they are only figures against light. Then bodies. Then familiar walking styles. Then the long outlines of spears across shoulders. Voices rise. Children run ahead. Adults remain calmer, but not indifferent. Everyone is reading the scene before a word is spoken. Are they carrying meat? Are they limping? Are they smiling? Today, there is weight on their shoulders beyond tools alone. A successful hunt. No dramatic roar erupts like in a film. But the mood changes instantly. Relief spreads first, then energy, then excitement. Hunger has many emotional layers. Food means more than calories. It means tonight is easier. Tomorrow begins from strength instead of deficit. The hunters are tired in a way different from gatherers. Gathering drains steadily. Hunting often arrives in waves. Long patience, sudden exertion, more waiting, sharp bursts of danger, then hard labor afterward. Sweat has dried in white salt lines on skin. Legs are dusted with dirt. One person's forearm bears a scrape. Another's shoulder is reddened from carrying heavy loads. Between them hangs the proof of the day. Perhaps antelope, perhaps deer, perhaps smaller game, depending on region and season. Whatever the species, the animal now enters the human world not as a symbol, but as work. That part is often forgotten. The kill is not the end of hunting. It is the beginning of processing. The body is lowered carefully near camp. Children crowd too close and are shooed back. Dogs, if this were a later era or certain region, would circle eagerly. But in many places 40,000 years ago, that relationship was only beginning or had not yet formed. Here is human hands that gather first. A moment of stillness comes. One hunter places a hand on the animal. Another speaks softly. Perhaps words of thanks. Perhaps a traditional phrase. Perhaps nothing formal at all, only respectful silence. We cannot know exact rituals, but evidence from many human societies suggests kills often carried meaning beyond appetite. When a life feeds many lives, people notice. Then knives come out. Stone blades flash in sunlight. If you imagine crude hacking, think again. Skilled butchery requires precision. Where to cut for easiest separation. How to preserve hide intact. How to remove organs quickly before spoilage. Which tendons are valuable for bindings. Which bones contain marrow worth later cracking. Which portion should be eaten first and which can wait. The first incision is deliberate. Skin parts under pressure. Warmth escapes. The smell is strong, metallic, earthy, immediate. Children watch with fascination and discomfort. This too is education. Life and death were not hidden behind factory walls. Food had faces, blood, weight, and consequence. Several adults join in. This is not one person's prize to hoard. In many foraging societies, large game was shared widely. There are practical reasons for this. Meat spoils. Hunting success is unpredictable. A hunter who shares today may rely on others tomorrow. Generosity becomes insurance. It also builds status, but not always in the modern sense of wealth accumulation. Prestige in many small-scale societies often comes from skill, courage, humor, wisdom, and willingness to distribute rather than hoard. A person who boasts too much or keeps too much can damage trust. The hide is removed in broad sections. Nothing wasted. Later it may become clothing, wrapping, bedding, straps, shelter covering, or containers. Sinew from the legs can become cord stronger than many plant fibers. Bones may become tools, awls, needles, handles, ornaments. Antler can be shaped. Even stomach or bladder tissue in some contexts can serve useful purposes. Modern people often throw away what ancient people transformed. As the butchering continues, one hunter begins telling the story. Not because anyone demanded entertainment, but because humans narrate events almost automatically. How they found tracks near the dry creek. How the herd winded them once and bolted. How they circled downslope. How one young hunter nearly stepped on loose stones and ruined the approach. Laughter erupts at that part, while the embarrassed hunter protests loudly. Then comes the hard part of the story, the waiting. Many hunts involve far more waiting than chasing. Hidden in brush, holding still despite insects, watching wind direction, letting animals settle, conserving energy. A patient mind could matter as much as a fast body. Or perhaps today's story was one of persistence. They tracked the animals through heat for hours, not trying to outrun them in speed, but outlast them in endurance. Human beings are extraordinary distance movers. Our bodies cool through sweating. Our posture saves energy over long travel. Our legs and feet are built for repeated strides. In the right conditions, cooperation and stamina become deadly advantages. However it happened, success was never guaranteed. This matters because our myths often replace uncertainty with inevitability. We imagine ancient hunters as masters who almost always prevailed. In truth, failure was common. A snapped shaft, a wrong wind, a startled herd, injury, storm, exhaustion, empty return. That is why gathering mattered so much. Reliable foods buffered risky foods. The two systems work together. Near the fire, organs are prepared first. These spoil fastest and contain dense nutrition. Liver, heart, kidneys depending on cultural preference and knowledge. Some pieces are roasted immediately on sharpened sticks or hot stones. Others are set aside for particular people. In many societies, distribution follows custom. Elders, children, hunters, nursing mothers, or whoever needs it most. No universal rule existed across all ancient humans, but rules of some kind almost certainly did. Whenever repeated sharing matters, expectations emerge. A child receives a hot strip of meat and dances from foot to foot because it burns the fingers but is too delicious to drop. Everyone laughs. An elder tears softer pieces for someone with worn teeth. A nursing mother eats quickly while holding an infant to her chest. Hunger meets tenderness in the same moment. The fire grows stronger. Smoke curls around hanging strips already being prepared for drying or light smoking. Preservation extends abundance into future days. Salting in the modern sense may not always be available, but drying, smoking, cool storage, fat mixing, and strategic consumption all help. Nearby, someone cracks a long bone with a hammerstone. The sound rings sharp. Inside is marrow, rich and prized. Children gather instantly. They know what comes next. Fingers scoop warm fat from hollow bone. Faces shine with grease. There is no need to convince anyone to eat nutrient-dense food here. One of the hunters now sits apart briefly, massaging calves. The body keeps records of effort. To hunt successfully was not simply to be brave. It required conditioning built over years. Walking long distances, carrying loads, recovering from strain, knowing how to move quietly, how to throw accurately, how to read terrain under fatigue. Skill lived in the whole person. A younger teen hovers nearby, listening to every word of the story. Not yet fully trusted on major hunts perhaps, but learning. Watching where mistakes happened. Memorizing tactics. Measuring adults against the image of who he or she hopes to become. Adolescence in this world had purpose woven directly into daily life. There was no long gap where people were physically capable yet socially unnecessary. Young people learned by joining real tasks in gradually increasing ways. Responsibility arrived through participation. As afternoon shifts toward evening, meat distribution continues. Some portions are eaten now because bodies need immediate replenishment. Some are set aside for drying. Some perhaps saved for those who are away or unable to work. In small groups, memory tracks fairness. Everyone knows who contributes in visible and invisible ways. That invisible labor matters. A person who stayed in camp with children allowed hunters to leave. Someone who maintained fire-protected all food processing. Someone who repaired baskets made gathering possible. Someone who remembered where flint could be found made better tools possible. Someone who cared for the injured preserved future skill. No one survives alone long. The successful hunt becomes social fuel as much as nutritional fuel. People repeat the best moments of a story before sunset even arrives. The near stumble grows bigger each retelling. The distance of the final throw lengthens suspiciously. The animal becomes faster, stronger, more cunning. Narrative has already begun polishing memory into legend. This too is ancient. Facts feed the body once. Stories feed identity for years. As shadows stretch longer, more tasks begin. Fresh hides are pegged or weighted for later scraping. Sinew is separated and hung. Bones are stacked. Stone blades are resharpened because edges dull quickly against hide and joint. Ashes move to create better cooking surfaces. Children are sent for more wood before darkness deepens. Notice how abundance creates labor rather than ending it. When food arrives, work multiplies. Preserve it, divide it, protect it, transform it, remember it. Yet morale is high. Even fatigue feels different when effort has paid off. The hunters now eat alongside everyone else, not as kings, but as participants in a system larger than themselves. Their skill mattered. So did the gatherers' baskets beside the fire. Tonight's meal exists because many forms of competence met in one place. And perhaps there is another lesson hidden here. Modern cultures often glorify dramatic contributions while overlooking steady ones. We celebrate the visible win, the bold act, the public success. But human survival was usually built by quieter things: consistency, maintenance, cooperation, memory, sharing, patience. The sun lowers further. The sharpness of day softens into gold. Smoke smells sweeter in cool air. Children slow at last after hours of movement. The camp draws inward again toward flame and familiar faces. Soon tools will be set aside. Soon the dangerous world beyond the circle of light will darken. Soon food will become feast, work will become story, and the oldest technology of all will begin to do what it has done for countless generations: bring human beings together in the night. Darkness does not arrive suddenly. It comes the way it always has for most of human existence, slowly and without negotiation. The sky deepens from gold to orange to deep blue, and then to something heavier, quieter. Shadows lengthen across the camp. The last warmth of the sun leaves the stones and soil, and the air begins to cool again. But unlike modern life, where night often means separation into individual rooms, screens, and private spaces, here night pulls everyone together. Because night is dangerous. Not in the dramatic sense only, but in the simple biological sense that humans are not naturally adapted to darkness. Vision weakens. Distance disappears. Movement becomes uncertain. For most of evolutionary history, night belonged to predators with better senses than ours. Lions, hyenas, wolves in some regions, large cats in others, all moved more freely when humans could see least. And in that stability, something subtle becomes visible. Human life here is not defined by separation between work and meaning. They're the same thing. Gathering food is not just labor. It is knowledge of land. Hunting is not just violence. It is cooperation and endurance. Storytelling is not just entertainment. It is education and memory. Fire is not just technology. It is social center. Modern categories collapse here. Time passes differently too. Not measured in hours or minutes, but in cycles. Light and dark, hunger and fullness, movement and rest, seasons of abundance and scarcity. An elder watches the fire for a long moment. Their face is lit from below, eyes reflecting orange light. In many ancient societies, elders were not pushed aside. They were anchored in the center of continuity. Even when physical strength declined, memory and knowledge remained essential. Someone adds a final piece of wood. Flames rise briefly, then settle. The fire becomes steadier again, quieter, more controlled. Conversation fades slowly, not because it is forced to stop, but because energy declines naturally. One by one, voices become softer. Sentences shorten. Pauses lengthen, until only the fire remains as sound. Crack, pop, Soft wind moving through grass outside the circle. Beyond camp, darkness is complete. But inside, light continues to define space, identity, safety, belonging. And as most people sleep or drift towards sleep, the fire continues its work without language or instruction. It holds the night together. And somewhere within that glow, human life continues exactly as it has for tens of thousands of years. Not because it is easy, but because it is shared. Night in the Paleolithic world is not silence in the modern sense. It is layered sound. The fire is still alive, but smaller now. The flames have settled into a steady glow, no longer reaching high, but still strong enough to define the space around the camp. Everything beyond that circle is uncertainty. Not imagined danger in a storytelling sense, but real biological reality. Humans are not night specialists. The darkness belongs to other senses, other creatures, other rhythms. And yet the camp does not feel abandoned. Even in sleep, there is structure. Bodies are close together, not scattered. People instinctively maintain proximity because distance reduces safety and warmth. Heat is shared between bodies. Hides are pulled over multiple people, not individually. Children remain physically connected to adults. Even unconscious movement reflects long evolutionary habit. Stay near others, stay near fire, stay near group. Someone is awake. There is almost always someone awake. Not in a formal guard role with defined hours and duties, but in a natural rhythm that likely evolved over hundreds of thousands of years. Light sleepers, older individuals, young adults without infants, people who naturally wake between sleep cycles. The camp is never entirely unmonitored. This is important because in a world without walls, locks, or artificial security systems, awareness itself is protection. The person tending the fire adjusts embers gently. Too much fuel and flames flare, wasting wood and attracting unnecessary attention. Too little and the fire risks dying completely, which would change everything about the night. Fire is not simply warmth. It is psychological structure. When it is present, the mind relaxes slightly even in danger. When it weakens, vigilance increases. The fire tender listens, not only to the camp, but beyond it. Wind moves through grass outside. Insects shift rhythm as temperature drops. Somewhere far off, an animal moves through brush. Maybe a small herbivore, maybe something larger. Sounds at night are harder to interpret, and interpretation matters. Because misreading the environment costs energy, and energy is life. There is no panic, but there is attention. That is the balance ancient humans lived with constantly. Not constant fear, but constant awareness. Near the edge of the sleeping group, a child stirs. Not fully waking, just shifting position. An adult gently pulls the hide tighter and places a hand on the child's back. The contact is brief, but grounding. The child settles again. This small gesture is repeated countless times in human history across all cultures and environments. Reassurance through touch, protection through proximity. Sleep here is not isolated. It is communal even in unconsciousness. The fire crackles softly as a piece of wood collapses inward. For a moment, sparks rise and drift upward into the night sky before fading. The fire tender adds a small branch, not to increase brightness, but to stabilize the flame. Fire maintenance is constant calibration, not dramatic action. Above, the stars remain unchanged. That stability itself would have been meaningful. Ancient people lived in a world where many things were unpredictable. Weather, animal movement, resource availability, illness. But the sky offered repetition. Certain patterns returned with reliability. Over generations, this likely helped structure time, memory, and expectation. The fire tender looks outward again. A sound, not close but noticeable. A rustle in the distance. Could be wind moving through brush. Could be a small animal. Could be something larger passing through territory. The response is not immediate action, but observation. Listening longer. Waiting. Determining whether the sound continues, changes, or disappears. It fades, the kind of life that does not appear in legends, but makes legends possible. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the sky begins to change again. Not yet sunrise, only the faintest shift at the edge of darkness. A signal that the long night is not endless. And that soon, once again, the world will expand beyond firelight into something larger, brighter, and full of movement. The first change is not visible. It is felt, a subtle easing in the air, as if the night is no longer pressing down quite as heavily. The cold remains, but it loses its edge. The watcher at the fire notices this before anything else. Humans are extremely sensitive to environmental shifts at dawn because for most of evolutionary history, dawn meant safety was increasing. Night danger was fading, but it is not gone yet. The fire is still necessary, still central, still the only reliable circle of certainty in a world that is slowly returning to visibility. The embers glow low, carefully managed through the final hours of darkness. The watcher adds a thin branch, not to create brightness, but to ensure continuity. Fire is not restarted each morning in this world. It is preserved. Around the fire, people begin to stir again. Not all at once, not dramatically, slowly, in waves, as sleep cycles complete and bodies respond to the shift in temperature and light. A child turns first, then opens their eyes briefly before closing them again. An adult exhales deeply and shifts position. Someone pulls a hide tighter over their shoulders. The camp is transitioning. This transition is one of the most important rhythms in prehistoric life, even though it leaves almost no archaeological trace. The movement from sleep to wakefulness is not just physical. It is social. It is cognitive. It is the moment when yesterday becomes today. The watcher looks outward again. The sky is lighter now at the edge of the horizon. Not full sunrise yet, but the deep darkness has thinned into something closer to gray. Shapes in the distance begin to separate from one another. Trees are no longer just black silhouettes. The land is returning. And with returning light comes information. Birds begin to call again. Their voices were absent or reduced during the deepest night. Now they return in stages, each species responding differently to light levels. For ancient humans, this was not background sound. It was environmental timing. Bird activity helped indicate dawn progression, weather changes, and seasonal shifts. Inside the camp, someone sits up and rubs their eyes. They glance immediately toward the fire. It is still alive. That small confirmation matters. A lost fire would change the entire structure of the day. It would require time, effort, and sometimes cooperation from neighboring groups to restart. Fire continuity is stability. Stability means energy saved. Energy saved means survival increased. One by one, people begin waking more fully. There is no alarm, no scheduled wake-up, no external command. Instead, there is a shared biological rhythm shaped by light, temperature, and group movement. Humans synchronize easily in small communities because coordination increases survival efficiency. A child is already awake. Children often experience dawn as a return to activity rather than a transition. They move toward the fire immediately, drawn by warmth and familiarity. An adult gently guides them back into the circle to stay warm while others wake. The fire is adjusted again. Just enough fuel is added to strengthen it slightly as morning arrives. The goal is not brightness, but readiness. Soon, cooking will begin again. Tools will be used. Movement will increase. The fire must be capable of supporting activity, not just observation. The watcher finally relaxes. Their role is ending. Another person takes over naturally. There is no formal exchange. Fatigue and alertness are enough signals. Humans are skilled at reading each other's states without explicit communication, especially in small groups where familiarity is constant. The previous watcher lies down. Sleep returns quickly, not because conditions are perfect, but because exhaustion and safety allow it. This rotation is critical. It ensures that no single individual carries the burden of night vigilance continuously. Over time, this shared responsibility reduces risk and preserves group functioning. As dawn approaches further, the environment outside the camp becomes more active. Small animals begin moving. Tracks in soft soil from the night before become more visible as light increases. Moisture on plants reflects early sunlight. The world is reappearing in detail. Someone steps outside the camp boundary. Not far, just enough to assess surroundings. This is a habitual behavior, not a ritual. Checking for signs of predators, checking wind direction, checking whether anything unusual occurred during the night. The land is always being read. They notice tracks, not fresh enough to be immediate danger, but recent enough to be noted. Another animal passed nearby during the night or early morning hours. Perhaps a predator, perhaps scavengers, perhaps nothing threatening at all. But information is always stored mentally for later use. Inside the camp, activity begins to organize. Food preparation resumes first. Leftovers from previous days' processing are checked. Meat that is drying is inspected for spoilage or insects. Roots are gathered from storage spots. Nuts are sorted again. Nothing is wasted unless it has become unsafe. A person checks the fire carefully. Ash is rearranged. Heat is concentrated. New fuel is prepared. Fire management in early morning is about efficiency. Fuel must be used wisely because gathering wood also requires time and effort. Children are given small tasks, not as labor in the modern sense, but as learning, carrying small sticks, sorting objects, observing adults. Every action is a lesson embedded in daily life. The sky brightens further. Now colors begin to appear. Pale orange, soft blue. Light spreads across terrain and reveals detail that was hidden in darkness. Shadows shorten. Edges sharpen. Distance becomes more understandable again. With visibility restored, planning begins. Today's decisions are not formal meetings. They are conversations shaped by observation. People discuss what was seen yesterday, what was gathered, what remains, what is needed. These discussions are fluid, overlapping, and continuous. One group may decide to gather plants again. Another may consider checking animal tracks more carefully. Someone may suggest revisiting a water source. These are not separate departments or jobs. They are flexible roles that shift depending on need, skill, and opportunity. The fire is now fully active again. Small cooking begins. Food is not prepared in large batches like modern kitchens. It is prepared continuously as needed. A root is placed near heat. A piece of meat is warmed. Nuts are cracked. Everything is immediate, responsive to hunger rather than schedule. A child receives food first again. This reflects a pattern observed in many small-scale societies, prioritizing future survival by supporting children's growth. Adults often adjust their own intake to ensure younger members are fed. As morning strengthens, movement increases. Some people prepare to leave camp again. Others remain to maintain shelter, tools, children, or fire. The group naturally divides based on needs and skills rather than fixed assignment. Before leaving, there is one more check of the environment. Not formal, not ceremonial, but practical. Weather, wind, animal movement signs, resource availability. Everything that can be observed is considered. The land is not separate from life. It is part of decision-making. And as the group prepares to move out again, one thing becomes clear about prehistoric existence that often gets misunderstood in modern retellings. Life was not divided into events the way we think of it now. There is no sharp boundary between morning preparation, work, travel, food gathering, social interaction, and rest. These things overlap constantly. A conversation could become a teaching moment. A walk could become a search for food. A break could become repair work. A story could become instruction. Everything flowed. And as the sun fully rises over the landscape, another day begins exactly as countless days before it. Not with ceremony, not with announcement, but with people continuing to survive together inside a living world that demands attention, memory, and cooperation every single moment. By the time the sun has fully risen, the camp is no longer a place of stillness. It has become a temporary center of activity, constantly reshaping itself based on who is present and what is needed. Some people are leaving. Some are staying. Some are returning briefly to adjust tools, collect items, or check on children before moving again. There is no fixed start to work in the modern sense. The day simply unfolds. One group moves out first, following the same loose direction as yesterday's gathering route. They are not rushing. Speed is not the priority. Awareness is. Every step is part of scanning the environment. Soil, plants, animal signs, weather shifts, distant sounds. The landscape is no longer just terrain. It is a record of activity. A bent blade of grass might indicate movement of animals. Disturbed soil might reveal digging or passing feet. Broken twigs may show direction of travel. Even smell carries information. Wet earth, plant resin, animal presence, smoke from distant groups. Humans in this world are constantly interpreting. This is not effort in the modern sense of focused concentration on one task. It is distributed awareness. Attention is wide, not narrow. The brain is continuously processing multiple streams of information at once. The group pauses near a slope. One person kneels. They point to the ground without speaking at first. Others gather quietly. The sign is simple. Tracks, not fresh enough for immediate pursuit, but recent enough to be meaningful. The spacing suggests movement at a steady pace, not running. The direction suggests travel toward water. Information is shared briefly, then stored, because not every sign leads to action immediately. Ancient humans did not react to every piece of information with urgency. They accumulated it, compared it with other signs, and built a mental map of ongoing activity in their environment. Meanwhile, another subgroup is already working elsewhere. Closer to a patch of vegetation, people are gathering plant foods again. This is not repetition of yesterday. It is continuation of a cycle that depends entirely on season, weather, and ecological timing. One person identifies edible greens. Another digs carefully at the base of a plant to extract a root without damaging surrounding growth. This is not random foraging. It is controlled harvesting informed by memory. If plants are destroyed, future survival is reduced. That understanding is deeply embedded in behavior, even without formal language for ecology. A child watches closely, not just watching, but learning patterns, where plants grow, how they look at different stages, how adults decide what is safe. There is no separation between learning and living. Education is constant exposure. Farther away, another individual collects small stones. Not all stone is equal. Some fracture cleanly into sharp edges. Others are too soft or too brittle. Knowledge of material quality determines tool production success. A wrong choice can waste hours of effort. The group reconvenes briefly at a familiar resting point. Not a meeting in structured terms, but a natural regrouping. People return, share what they found, adjust direction. One group reports good plant availability. Another notes animal movement signs. Decisions form organically from overlapping observations. There is no single leader issuing commands. Instead, influence is distributed based on knowledge. The person who understands plants guides plant gathering. The person who reads tracks guides movement interpretation. The person who knows terrain guides navigation. Authority is situational, not fixed. This flexibility is one of the key survival advantages of early human groups. It allows rapid adaptation without rigid hierarchy, slowing response. As the day continues, temperature rises. Heat changes behavior. Movement slows slightly during peak warmth. People seek shade when possible. Energy conservation becomes important. Water becomes more significant. Even silence increases at certain moments as effort is minimized. But activity does not stop. Instead, it shifts. Some focus on tool maintenance under shade. Stone edges are resharpened. Handles are checked for cracks. Binding materials are tightened. Every object is part of a chain of dependence. A broken tool can interrupt food gathering or hunting success. Others focus on food processing. Plants collected earlier are sorted again. Some are eaten raw. Others require preparation. Some are set aside for later cooking near fire. Nothing is random. Knowledge determines every step. A brief moment of alertness spreads through one part of the group. Not panic, just attention. A distant sound. Movement and brush. Heads turn. Body still briefly. This is automatic. Humans are constantly balancing curiosity and caution. After a few moments, it resolves into harmless animal movement. The tension fades. This kind of micro event happens repeatedly throughout a day. Most are nothing. Some are important. The skill lies in not overreacting, but not ignoring either. By mid-afternoon, the group's baskets are heavier again. Not dramatically, but enough to matter. Food has been steadily accumulated. Roots, seeds, greens, possibly small game or insects depending on region. It is not a single successful haul, but multiple small gains. This is crucial. Prehistoric survival is built on aggregation. Many small successes equal stability. A single large success is helpful, but not reliable. The group begins moving back toward camp. The return journey is slower. Load distribution matters. People adjust weight between them. Children may walk part of the way and be carried part of the way. Fatigue accumulates, but there is no rush unless danger demands it. As camp comes into view again, smoke signals familiarity. The site is still intact. No signs of disturbance. This simple observation matters more than modern people might realize. Returning to a stable camp after hours away is a reassurance of continuity. Inside camp, activity mirrors earlier patterns. Fire maintenance, food sorting, tool repair, care for children and elders. Preparation for evening meal begins gradually, even before full return of all groups. Information gathered during the day is shared again. Where food was found, where animals moved, what signs were observed. These reports update the group's shared mental map of the landscape. Knowledge is constantly refreshed. Evening is not yet here, but preparation begins early. Because nothing in this world is instantaneous. Cooking takes time. Gathering fuel takes time. Processing food takes time. Everything requires anticipation. As light begins to soften again toward late afternoon, a final shift occurs. The emotional tone of the camp changes. Not dramatically, but perceptibly. People begin to slow. Tasks become more rounded toward completion. Children return more consistently to the fire area. Tools are placed closer to resting positions. Conversation becomes less about planning and more about reflection. The day is approaching its closing cycle. But before night arrives again, there is one more important layer of prehistoric life that becomes visible here. The maintenance of social cohesion. People check on each other. Not formally, but continuously. A glance to ensure someone is well. A shared piece of food. A brief conversation. A gesture of inclusion. These small interactions maintain group stability. Because survival is not only about food and shelter. It is about relationships that hold the group together under pressure. As the sun lowers slightly, casting longer shadows across the camp, the rhythm begins to return toward fire-centered life again. Not because work is finished, but because the cycle is turning. And as it always has for tens of thousands of years, humans prepare once again to gather around light, share what the land provided, and move into the next stage of the only pattern that truly governed their existence. Day becoming night, and night becoming day again. As the sun lowers further, the light across the landscape changes in a way that is immediately noticeable to everyone in the camp. Shadows lengthen, colors deepen, movement slows. This is not symbolic or emotional in a romantic sense. It is biological. Human behavior across environments tends to track light levels very closely. As visibility decreases, activity naturally concentrates toward the fire zone because that is where safety, warmth, and coordination exist. People returning from the day's movement arrive in staggered groups. There is no single homecoming moment. Instead, it is a continuous flow of arrivals. Each group carries what they gathered. Woven baskets of roots and seeds, small bundles of plants, occasionally pieces of animal material or tools that needed repair along the way. The first action is always simple. Set items down. Breathe. Reorient. Then comes assessment. What was collected? What needs immediate processing? What can be stored? What must be eaten quickly before it spoils? These decisions are not written or recorded, but they are shared knowledge built from experience and memory. Near the fire, activity increases again. The fire itself is now stronger than it was during the afternoon. Fuel has been steadily added throughout the day. It is no longer just a minimal survival flame. It is becoming a central hub again. Heat radiates outward, drawing people into a circle that naturally organizes social structure. Food processing begins in parallel streams. One person handles plant material. Another prepares meat, if available. Another sorts items for storage. Nothing is centralized. Everything is distributed across hands and knowledge. A young person cracks seeds using a stone. The motion is repetitive, practiced, not efficient in a modern mechanical sense, but precise enough to avoid waste. Every broken shell is an opportunity for nutrition. Every intact seed is preserved. Nearby, someone is grinding plant matter between two stones. The movement is rhythmic. Downward pressure. Rotation. Repeat. The result will be flour-like material that can be mixed with water or fat and heated near the fire later. This is not cuisine in the modern sense. It is transformation of raw environment into digestible energy. Children move between adults, not aimlessly, but opportunistically. They observe, imitate, ask short questions, receive short answers, and continue moving. Learning is continuous and fragmented, not structured in lessons. Attention is pulled toward whatever is most interesting or accessible at the moment. An older individual inspects tools again. Stone edges dull quickly with use. Wood cracks under repeated stress. Bindings loosen. Repair is constant. Nothing lasts without maintenance. This creates a culture where attention to objects is habitual. Nothing is set and forget. Everything is maintained. As evening deepens further, a shift in activity begins. Cooking becomes more central. Fire is now actively used rather than just maintained. Food is placed closer to heat. Some items are roasted directly in embers. Others are warmed slowly near the edge. Timing is not measured, but observed. Smell, texture, and experience guide readiness. People begin to gather more tightly around the fire, not only for warmth, but for coordination. This is when the day's information is shared more fully. One group describes where plants were abundant. Another explains animal movement patterns observed during the day. Someone mentions changes in weather signs noticed earlier. These exchanges are not formal reports. They are storytelling in practical form. Information is embedded in narrative because narrative is the most efficient way to transmit complex environmental knowledge. A brief moment of laughter occurs. Something small, an imitation, a shared mistake, a playful interaction between children creates a release of tension. This matters more than it might seem. Social bonding is reinforced through small emotional peaks, not only survival tasks. As food becomes ready, distribution begins. Not in rigid portions, but in socially understood sharing patterns. People eat together in overlapping groups. Some sit, some crouch, some move while eating. Food is passed between individuals without ceremony, but with awareness. Children receive food frequently. Adults adjust their intake based on availability and group need. There is no separation between mealtime and other time. Eating is continuous and integrated into activity. As darkness approaches further, voices around the fire begin to slow. The tone of conversation changes. Less planning, more reflection, more storytelling. Stories are not entertainment alone. They are memory structures. They preserve information about past hunts, dangerous places, seasonal changes, successful strategies, and mistakes to avoid. A story might describe a difficult winter. Another might recount a successful cooperation between groups. Another might explain why a certain plant must always be cooked before eating. Each story carries embedded instruction. As the fire burns brighter against the darkening environment, the boundary between inside and outside becomes more distinct again. Inside is light, heat, and group presence. Outside is unknown space filled with reduced visibility and uncertain movement. Someone briefly leaves the firelight circle. Not far, just to check surroundings. This is habitual even in safe conditions. The land is always being reevaluated. Night is not assumed to be identical to previous nights. Conditions can change quickly. They return without incident. The group remains stable. As night fully arrives, sleeping arrangements begin to form again. Not as a single moment, but as gradual withdrawal. Some people lie down early due to fatigue. Others remain near the fire longer, especially those taking responsibility for night awareness. Children are settled first. They are placed close to adults, often physically connected. Coverings are adjusted. Bodies are positioned to conserve warmth. The fire is adjusted again, reduced but sustained. Enough light remains to maintain orientation within the camp. Too much light would waste fuel. Too little would reduce safety. Balance is again central. A quiet shift happens in conversation. Words become fewer. Pauses become longer. Attention moves from outward activity to inward rest. One by one, tasks conclude. Tools are placed near resting bodies. Food is stored or secured. Remaining embers are arranged for stability. The camp transitions from active coordination to resting state, but not complete inactivity. Because even in rest, humans remain embedded in awareness cycles shaped by millions of years of survival pressure. Night watch begins again, and as the first stars become visible above the firelit circle, the pattern repeats itself once more. A group of humans, not separated from nature, but living entirely within it, balancing light and darkness, effort and rest, attention and sleep, in a cycle that will continue unchanged for generations far beyond this single day. Fire remains at the center, not as spectacle, but as necessity. Its glow defines the boundary of human space. Everything inside that circle is controlled, familiar, and maintained. Everything outside it is uncertain, unlit, and only partially known through sound, smell, and memory. People are arranged in layers of rest. Closest to the fire are those responsible for waking vigilance or those most in need of warmth. Slightly farther out are adults in deeper sleep. Children are kept physically connected to adults, often under shared coverings. This arrangement is not planned. It emerges from repeated experience of what keeps people alive and comfortable. The night watcher is awake again, or has changed depending on how the cycle shifted. There is no strict schedule, but there is structure. Humans naturally rotate attention and sleep in small groups because total exhaustion in a single individual would endanger everyone. The watcher listens first, not actively, but continuously. The mind is never fully idle in this role. It is tracking subtle changes in wind, distant movement, shifts in fire behavior, the sound of insects, and the absence of expected sounds. Absence is just as important as presence. A sudden silence where birds or insects should be can indicate predator movement. A change in wind direction can carry unfamiliar scent. Even temperature shifts are noted subconsciously. The fire is adjusted again. Small changes. A branch shifted. A piece of fuel added. Ash repositioned to maintain steady heat. This is not dramatic labor. It is maintenance of stability in an environment that does not naturally remain stable for human comfort. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the camp, an animal moves. Not close enough to cause alarm, but close enough to be noticed. The watcher does not react immediately. Reaction without confirmation wastes energy and can disrupt sleeping group members unnecessarily. Instead, they observe. The sound does not repeat. It fades into normal nocturnal background noise. No action is taken. This is an important part of prehistoric survival that is often misunderstood. Restraint. Not every stimulus becomes behavior. Hours pass in slow continuity. Inside the sleeping circle, breathing patterns shift. Some people enter deeper sleep phases. Others move slightly and settle again. Sleep is not perfectly still. It is layered and dynamic. Dreaming occurs, though its content is unknown. But based on neurological understanding, It likely involves memory processing, emotional regulation, and environmental simulation. Faces, landscapes, animals, and past experiences are probably common elements. The brain rehearses survival, not consciously but biologically. The fire slowly reduces again and requires adjustment. The watcher feeds it minimally. Too much flame would waste resources. Too little would risk extinction of the fire, which would transform the entire camp into a vulnerable state. This balance is constant. There is no moment where responsibility fully disappears. Even rest is structured around environmental dependence. At one point in the night, a sound becomes slightly more distinct. The watcher shifts attention. Is movement through brush. Not near enough to identify clearly, but different from wind. The body responds automatically with increased alertness. Muscles tighten slightly. Breathing slows. This is ancient survival conditioning. But again, the sound does not develop further. No repeated approach. No pattern indicating threat. After a period of observation, it is classified as non-threatening movement. Likely small animal activity in the periphery of the camp's environment. Attention relaxes, but does not fully release. That distinction is critical. As night continues, the fire becomes lower again, transitioning into a steady ember state. This is the most stable configuration for long periods of sleep cycles. It produces enough heat to maintain comfort and enough light to maintain minimal visibility. The watcher's role begins to weaken naturally as fatigue accumulates. But instead of a sudden collapse into sleep, there is a gradual transfer. Another individual begins to stir slightly. Not fully awake, but transitioning. This overlapping awareness ensures continuity. One person is never solely responsible without backup for long periods. Even in small groups, redundancy is built into behavior. The first watcher settles back. Sleep comes quickly. The second takes over without verbal instruction. This system is not formalized. It is learned through repetition and necessity. Outside the camp, the world continues without human interpretation. Nocturnal predators move through territories. Herbivores remain alert or rest in hidden areas. Insects dominate soundscapes. Wind shifts across terrain. Moisture settles on vegetation. The human group is only one small node in a much larger ecological system that never pauses. Inside the camp, temperature drops slightly further. People instinctively adjust coverings. Bodies move closer together. Contact increases warmth efficiency. This behavior is universal in human groups without artificial insulation systems. Physical proximity is not only social, it is thermoregulatory. A child briefly wakes, looks toward fire, sees it still present, returns to sleep without distress. This is important. Continuity of fire equals continuity of safety perception. The presence of stable light and heat reduces anxiety responses even during unconscious awareness. Time continues without measurement. There are no hours, only cycles of fatigue, alertness, temperature, and sound. Eventually, the sky begins another transition, this time even more subtle than the previous dawn shift. Not visible light yet, but a change in atmospheric tone. Night begins to lose density. The watcher notices before anyone else. Birds begin to show early movement signs again. Distant calls resume at low frequency. The environment is preparing to transition. Fire is checked again. Still stable. Still present. This continuity is crucial, because in prehistoric life, losing fire overnight was not just inconvenience. It was structural disruption. It meant energy loss, time loss, increased vulnerability, and often a complete reorganization of the day. But that has not happened. The camp remains intact. As the sky slowly brightens at its edge, sleeping bodies begin to shift again. The cycle is restarting. Not dramatically, not ceremonially, but biologically and socially, exactly as it has for countless generations. And before anyone is fully awake, before speech begins, before planning starts, before movement expands outward into the landscape again. There's a brief moment of shared stillness that defines prehistoric human life more than anything else. A group of people, alive, together, having survived another night in a world that never stops changing, and preparing, without announcement or structure, for another day of reading, gathering, watching, and continuing the long, uninterrupted rhythm of human existence. As dawn strengthens, the camp does not start in a sudden way. It expands. That is the best way to describe it. Awareness spreads outward from the fire circle into bodies, then into speech, then into movement, then into decisions. The transition from sleep to action is gradual but inevitable, shaped by light increasing across the landscape. People rise in stages. First, those closest to the fire, then others who are in lighter sleep, then children, who often wake not because of conscious decision, but because of environmental cues, temperature, movement, voices, and shifting light. The fire is still present, but it is no longer the central focus. It becomes support infrastructure, something stable in the background while attention shifts outward. The first task is always assessment, not formalized, not spoken as a rule, but repeated so often that it becomes automatic. People step slightly beyond the immediate camp area and scan the surroundings. They look for disturbances, tracks, weather changes, animal signs, anything that might affect the day. The land is red again. Fresh tracks from the night may now be clearer in morning light. Dew reveals movement patterns that were invisible in darkness. Soil shows impressions more sharply. The environment is effectively reset visually every morning. Inside the camp, others begin organizing food again. Leftovers are checked first. Nothing is assumed safe without inspection. Smell, texture, and appearance all matter. Spoilage is not just wasteful, it is dangerous. Even slight changes in condition determine whether food is consumed immediately or discarded. Fire is adjusted again. Morning fire management is different from night management. At night, the goal is stability and continuity. In the morning, the goal is usability. Enough heat to prepare food, enough flame to signal activity, enough control to conserve resources. A few people begin preparing to leave, not in a dramatic departure, but in a coordinated, familiar pattern. Tools are gathered. Containers are checked. Carrying equipment is adjusted. Each person mentally reviews what they expect to do, even if the plan will change as new information appears. There is no fixed schedule, but there is direction. One group prepares for plant gathering again. Another considers checking animal movement paths seen earlier. Someone suggests revisiting a known resource area that has been productive in past seasons. These decisions are flexible and constantly updated. Knowledge of the land is never static. It changes with weather, time, animal migration, and plant cycles. A successful group is one that constantly updates its understanding. Before leaving, there is one more shared moment of communication. Not formal instruction, but exchange. What was seen last night? What was heard? What changed? Even small observations matter. A shift in wind direction overnight. A new set of tracks. A plant area that seemed unusually sparse or abundant. These fragments accumulate into a shared mental model of the environment. Then movement begins. The group splits naturally into smaller units. Each moves in a slightly different direction, based on skill, need, and prior knowledge. Walking is steady, not rushed. The terrain immediately becomes active with interpretation again. Plants are no longer just background. They are potential food, medicine, or material. Stones are evaluated for tool potential. Animal sounds are noted and mentally categorized. Every sense is engaged. Sight tracks movement and color variation. Sound tracks distance and activity. Smell provides early warning of animals or water. Touch matters in terrain navigation. Even subtle changes in air pressure or humidity are noticed subconsciously. This is not effortful attention in the modern sense. It is constant distributed awareness. One group stops at a familiar area where vegetation is dense. Immediately, roles begin to form without discussion. One person scans higher plants. Another focuses on ground-level roots. Another observes animal disturbance signs. A child follows closely, watching everything but focusing on nothing in particular yet. The land is slowly read as a layered system of resources. A plant is identified, then checked, then either collected or left. There is no hesitation, only evaluation based on accumulated knowledge. Nearby, animal movement signs are examined. Not recent enough for pursuit, but useful for mapping. Direction, timing, size, all inferred from indirect evidence. Meanwhile, another subgroup encounters a different resource zone. They find water access. This changes priorities slightly. Water availability influences movement, rest points, and future planning. Even if not immediately consumed, its presence is noted and mentally recorded. Information is constantly layered. Nothing is isolated. Everything is connected to future decisions. By mid-morning, groups begin converging again. Not fully, but partially. Some return with gathered materials. Others bring observations rather than physical items. The camp becomes a temporary hub where information and resources are exchanged. Inside the camp, processing begins again. Food is sorted. Tools are repaired. Materials are prepared for storage or immediate use. There is no separation between work and home life in the modern sense. Everything is integrated into survival maintenance. Children participate in small tasks again, not as obligation, but as repetition and learning. They imitate adults constantly. They observe patterns of decision-making, not just actions. Why a plant is chosen. Why a tool is repaired. Why a direction is followed. This learning is slow, but continuous. By afternoon, the rhythm stabilizes again. Some groups continue gathering. Others remain near camp, maintaining structure. The fire remains central but not dominant. People move in and out of its influence constantly. And as the sun reaches higher positions again, the cycle continues in its familiar pattern. Observe, gather, share, adjust, repeat. Nothing is final. Nothing is permanent. Everything is responsive to the environment. And this responsiveness, the ability to constantly adapt without fixed structure, is what allowed early humans not just to survive, but to expand across vastly different landscapes over time. As the day continues unfolding, there is no single dramatic turning point, only continuous adjustment to a world that never stops changing, and a group of humans who learned, over hundreds of thousands of years, how to exist inside that change without breaking it, or themselves. As the sun begins its slow descent again, the character of the day changes. Not abruptly, but noticeably. The angle of light shifts, and with it, human behavior begins to reorganize. Movement becomes less exploratory and more purposeful. People who have been ranging farther begin orienting back toward the camp. The landscape, once open in all directions, starts to feel like it is gently pulling activity inward. This is not symbolic thinking. It is biological timing. Energy levels are lower now. Not exhaustion in the dramatic sense, but the natural decline that follows hours of walking, scanning, carrying, and processing information. Humans in this environment do not push through fatigue the way modern industrial life often demands. Instead, they adjust activity levels in response to it. The camp itself becomes more active again. Not in expansion, but in consolidation. People returning bring with them the results of the day. Plant materials, information about animal movement, observations about water, weather, and terrain changes. Everything is shared in short, overlapping exchanges rather than structured reporting. One group reports finding dense plant growth in a familiar area. Another notes that animal tracks were more scattered than expected, suggesting shifting movement patterns. Someone else mentions a change in wind direction that could indicate weather coming within the next day or two. None of this is treated as isolated facts. It is immediately integrated into group understanding. Inside the camp, food processing intensifies again. This is where much of the real labor of survival accumulates. not in dramatic hunts or distant journeys, but in continuous preparation of gathered resources. Roots are cleaned again. Seeds are sorted. Plant materials are checked for spoilage or contamination. Small adjustments are made constantly to ensure nothing is wasted. Fire becomes more central once more, not just for heat, but for transformation. Some foods require heat processing to become safe or more digestible. Others are improved in storage quality when dried or lightly cooked. Fire is not just a comfort. It is a chemical tool that expands what the environment can offer. Children remain active around the edges of this process. They are not passive observers. They participate in small, repeated actions, carrying, sorting, watching, imitating. The repetition builds deep familiarity over time. Knowledge is not taught in isolated lessons, but embedded in daily activity. A tool is repaired again near the fire. Stone edges are checked carefully. A cracked binding is replaced. A handle is reshaped slightly using abrasion and heat. Nothing is allowed to deteriorate unnoticed. Material culture in this environment is fragile. Everything requires maintenance. As afternoon shifts toward evening, social behavior begins to concentrate. People move closer together again, not because of instruction, but because warmth, light, and conversation naturally draw bodies inward as daylight decreases. The fire circle becomes the primary social space once more. Stories begin to reappear, not as entertainment alone, but as reinforcement of shared knowledge. A story about a difficult season where food was scarce. A memory of a successful cooperation with another group. An account of a dangerous animal encounter in a distant valley. Each story carries embedded survival information. Where to avoid, when to move, how to interpret signs, what patterns repeat over time. Even humor appears briefly. Small moments of laughter triggered by shared understanding or imitation of daily mistakes. These moments are not trivial. They reinforce group cohesion and reduce tension accumulated through constant environmental awareness. As light continues fading, preparation for night begins earlier than the actual darkness. This is important. Prehistoric groups do not wait for night to arrive before transitioning into night behavior. They anticipate it. Cooking is completed before full darkness. Sleeping arrangements are prepared early. Fire fuel is organized in advance. Everything is forward-looking. A final round of food distribution happens. Not formalized, but necessary. People eat what is available, prioritizing children and those who need energy most. There is no fixed portion system, but there is shared understanding of fairness and survival necessity. The fire is adjusted again. Fuel is arranged to ensure stability through the early night. Too much fuel would waste resources. Too little would risk loss of light and heat. Balance is always central. As darkness approaches, movement slows across the camp. People settle into closer positions. Tools are placed near resting areas. Conversations become shorter and more spaced out. The psychological shift toward night begins even before the sky fully darkens. Then comes the final transition. The sky dims. Shadows disappear. Fire becomes the primary visual anchor again. The outside world becomes less readable, more dependent on sound and memory. Night watch preparation begins once more, not as a formal duty roster, but as a natural emergence of alert individuals who remain awake longer or wake between sleep cycles. The group enters its resting formation again. Children closest to adults. Adults arranged around fire. One or two individuals maintaining awareness. The rest gradually entering sleep. And as the first stars appear again above the encampment, the cycle completes itself one more time. Not as repetition in a mechanical sense, but as a living rhythm shaped by necessity, environment, and adaptation. A rhythm that has no beginning and no end. Only continuation. Night returns fully once more. Not as an interruption, but as continuation of the same rhythm that has already happened countless times before this day, and will happen countless times after it. The fire is still alive. Smaller now, carefully controlled, but steady enough to maintain presence in the center of the camp. Its light is not bright, but it is stable. Stability is what matters most. Around it, the group has settled again into layered rest. The arrangement is almost identical to the previous night, not because of planning, but because successful patterns repeat themselves naturally. Humans in small survival groups do not reinvent daily structure. They refine what already works. Breathing becomes the dominant sound. Slow, irregular in small variations, but collectively steady. The watcher is awake, or someone is awake. It is less about identity and more about continuity. The role exists regardless of who fills it. Awareness is passed from person to person through time, not assigned as a fixed burden. The fire is checked again. Minimal adjustment. A branch shifted slightly. Ash moved to control airflow. Small corrections that prevent collapse of the system. Outside the camp, the world is again fully active without human control. Night animals move through territories. Wind shifts across terrain. Insects create constant background sound. The ecosystem continues its own rhythm independent of human presence. The watcher listens, not intensely, not anxiously, but continuously. This is a trained form of awareness built through repetition. Most sounds are nothing. Some can matter. The skill is in not overreacting while not becoming inattentive. Inside the sleeping group, subtle movements continue. A child shifts closer to an adult. An adult adjusts covering. Someone briefly stirs, opens eyes, and then returns to sleep after confirming fire stability. These micro-actions maintain comfort and security without breaking rest cycles. Time passes without measurement. There are no markers dividing hours. Only transitions in temperature, sound, and fatigue. The fire slowly weakens again. The watcher adjusts it, carefully conserving fuel. Everything burned must be replaced through future labor. Nothing is infinite. Even fire depends on continuous effort. At one point, a distant sound appears again. Faint, ambiguous. The watcher focuses attention outward. The sound does not repeat. It does not approach. It dissolves into normal night background. No action is taken. This restraint is critical. Not every unknown becomes threat. Most of prehistoric survival depends on correctly identifying what does not require response. Gradually, even the watcher's alertness softens. Fatigue builds naturally. Another person begins to take over in overlapping awareness. The transition is silent. The system continues. Inside the camp, sleep deepens again across the group. Dreaming continues in its private, internal form. Memory, emotion, landscape fragments, faces, movement, sound, all processed by the brain in ways shaped by survival history. But externally, nothing changes dramatically. The fire continues. The night continues. The camp continues. Hours pass. And somewhere far beyond human perception, the first hint of future dawn begins again. Not visible yet. Not meaningful yet. Only a slight shift in the quality of darkness. A reminder that night is never permanent. As that shift slowly grows, the group remains in its established rhythm. Sleeping, watching, breathing, existing together within a stable structure that has no written rules, no formal systems, no fixed authority. Only patterns that repeat because they work. And in that repetition, day after day, night after night, season after season, the real story of early human life is not survival against nature as an enemy, but continuous adaptation within it. Quiet, persistent, and uninterrupted, forming the foundation of everything that comes after.